There is a degree of delightful dissonance, I think, in holding a conference like this one in a place like Scott's Church. Meeting here, at least next door, for the last 150 years. I'm Phil Campbell, Senior Minister here at Scott's, and along with our ministry team member Dodgson, it was our dream to work with ISCAST to bring together tonight's program. My background was electrical engineering with a sideline in IT journalism. Johnson works in finance IT along with his theological studies. And we were keen for an event that speaks into this emerging issue of AI in a way that brings a calm balance rather than what's often a reactionary Christian negativity. Back in 1999, Google co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page adopted as the company motto, "Don't be evil." They realised right from the start the danger of bias in their search results. They recognised the risk of mixing advertising with content. Larry Page said, "We believe it's important for everyone to have access to the best information, and not only to the information people pay for you to see." In 2018, that motto was scrapped. How much deeper are those risks, if we can go to the next slide, since November 2022, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT and DALL-E 2. Right now, you have no idea whether I wrote these opening comments or if they've been scripted for me by ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Anthropic Claude, which means Alan Turing's famous 1950 Turing test for machine intelligence has suddenly been exceeded. If you can't tell if it's a human or machine who created these words, the machine, by his definition, has achieved intelligence. That raises all kinds of questions. Maybe the Turing test was too easy. Just because ChatGPT knows how to have a chat, does it really have a mind or consciousness or intentionality? Maybe, and if we go to the next slide, here's a thought that plays on me. Maybe a lot of our own conversation that we think is intelligent is really just a large language model in our heads, picking the next most likely words and stringing them out together based on the piles of data we've taken in, full of sport and politics and celebrity gossip. Tonight, those are the sort of questions we're going to be asking and pondering. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be intelligent? More importantly, what does it mean to be wise? How do we celebrate what's good about our new technologies and avoid what's not? You'll hear from our technologist, Neil Dodgson, who'll explain what AI is, what it's all about, what are its limits. Science and a moral framework from Chris Mulherron, and a biblical perspective on what it means to be human and the nature of real wisdom from Arthur Kiefer, followed by supper and then a Q&A. So a warm welcome on behalf of Scott's Church as I introduce Chris Mulherron to say a few words on behalf of his cast.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome everyone. It's really a great pleasure to see you all here and a great pleasure to work with Scott's Church and put on this event. I hope that by the end of the night you will agree that it's been really worthwhile. Let me do a brief introduction and advertisement for ISCAST. At ISCAST, we are absolutely convinced that in an increasingly secular, techno-scientific culture, the science-faith conversation is at the cutting edge of Christian engagement. Do you know that 60% of secondary students in faith-based schools think science and Christianity are in conflict? Let me say that again. 60% of students think they have to choose between believing in science and believing in Christ. That's almost 500,000 young people just in private schools who hold those views. And in churches, most pastors and theological educators are reluctant to talk about science. and many Christians in the pews are confused about the issue. ISCAST is in a unique position, and I'm not sure whether my slide moved on or not. No, it didn't. There it did. ISCAST is in a unique position here in Australia, a strategic position to address this problem. We have 40 years of experience, and we can call on hundreds of Christian scientists, technologists, theologians, philosophers from around the country, and sound technicians. If you're not a supporting member of ISCAST, please consider joining us in this important mission. You can sign up and or make a donation on the website. We also publish books like these ones, which you can buy at the book table outside. And finally, let me just say, and last slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Let me just say that the person who organised tonight is Jackie Yu. Jackie, could you wave your hand up the back? Tonight, Jackie came to ISCAST about a number of years ago, 3 years ago, before she finished her degree at RMIT. She has proved absolutely exceptional on doing all sorts of things, although her love is graphic design. And she told us about a month ago that she really wanted to upskill in graphic design, and would we mind if she left? Well, she didn't quite say it that way, because we do mind. So Jackie is leaving us in a month, and we're now advertising for one person or maybe multiple people to cover all the bases that Jackie has covered. So if you know somebody, preferably in Melbourne, who could cover some of these bases, we are now looking for expressions of interest. Yes, I was going to say, and I will say it. As you'll be able to tell if you look at the position description, there's a lot there. We aren't looking for Jesus, but we are looking for another Jackie. Thank you.
To introduce Professor Neil Dodgson to you. He's the Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Research and Professor of Computer Graphics at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. We've brought him here specially for tonight. He's written and spoken extensively on AI, and as a committed Christian intellectual, he's thought deeply about the intersection of technology and faith. So please welcome our keynote speaker, Neil.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. We love technology, don't we? It has been said that artificial intelligence will change the way that humans deal with one another forever. So how true is that? And what is artificial intelligence anyway? What's going on under the hood in an artificial intelligence system? And where is this disruptive technology likely to take us? Those are the questions that we're going to explore in the next 35 minutes. Artificial intelligence has been around since the 1940s, but it's only in the last decade that it has really taken off, with the development of deep neural network techniques inspired by the structure of the human brain. Today, artificial intelligence is used to diagnose cancer, to recognize speech, to identify people in a crowd. In the next decade, it will develop to do so much more than that. So to get things going, let's start with the philosophical. Can a machine think? Now, given this audience, that is likely a question most of you came with. G.K. Chesterton wrote in 1910, "A machine only is a machine because it cannot think." And you can interpret what he's trying to say in two different ways. Either he's saying a machine could never think, or he's saying if a machine could think, it would become something more than a machine. But is Chesterton right in what he says? Artificial intelligence has made massive strides in the past decade, and particularly in the last year, which is why we're here tonight. We now have systems like ChatGPT that are doing things that we thought were beyond the capabilities of computers. ChatGPT is writing essays that would get reasonable grades if submitted by an undergraduate student. DALL-E is creating artwork far faster than a trained graphic designer could. Sorry, Jackie. Google's Lambda was in the news recently because it convinced engineer Blake Lemoine that it was sentient. After he'd exchanged chat with Lambda, Blake said, if I didn't know exactly what it was, which is this computer program we built recently, I'd think it was a 7 or 8-year-old kid who happens to know physics. Other experts, other than Blake, are convinced that machines are approaching consciousness. But many other experts are convinced that there is no evidence whatsoever of sentience, and there's quite a lot of evidence against it. Professor Edgar Dijkstra, who is one of the founding fathers of computer programming, put it like this. He says, asking if a computer can think is like asking if a submarine can swim. That means that although the machine is doing something similar to what a human can do, it is not actually the same thing at all. So even the experts do not agree. And where does that leave people who are not experts? Well, they go here. They go, unless you're in the tech industry like me, artificial intelligence means the Terminator. It means robots who are going to take over the world and exterminate humanity. Okay, that is an extreme of what might happen. But that's certainly not what's happening now, and it's not where things are currently taking us. And really, it's not very helpful. So let me try to be helpful. Let me give you a bit of history. Artificial intelligence goes back 70 years to the earliest days of computing. Back at the start, in the 50s, there was great hope that we would develop artificial intelligence quickly. The thinking was, if people can do something, surely it will be easy to get a computer to do that same thing. It turns out that people are much more complicated than computer scientists thought. For example, understanding natural spoken language is something that most toddlers can do fairly easily. So early on in computing, it was thought, well, if kids can do this, we should be able to get speech recognition solved quickly. We thought we'd have it solved by the 1960s. It turned out to be stunningly difficult to get a computer to recognize speech, and it's only in the last 20 years that we've been able to do it. But today, we can make systems like Siri and Alexa that can recognize human speech. And they can do straightforward tasks that they're programmed to do in response to simple queries. But we're not yet at the point where you have a system that could engage in an intelligent conversation with you. You can't have an intelligent conversation with Alexa about, say, Anthony Albanese's latest press conference, or about New Zealand's recent appalling performance in the cricket. In the early days, we actually worked on getting computers to do things that they do well and that humans find difficult, which is symbolic manipulation, the sorts of things mathematicians do. So we got computers to do things like play chess, something most of us find difficult, and we were extraordinarily successful. It's easy to get a computer to play chess because there are straightforward rules and there are clear guidelines for what constitute good moves and bad moves. Computers have been able to beat humans at chess for decades. But a chess-playing computer is just a box of tricks, doing exactly what we told it to do. You can't hold a conversation with a chess-playing computer. It can't do anything other than play chess. And it hasn't stopped human beings from playing chess just because there are computers that can beat them. Well, today, we are well beyond the point of getting computers to play abstract games. The reason artificial intelligence is so in the news now, and the reason I'm here, is because it can do so much more and has so much promise. So after decades of research, there was a big breakthrough about 15, 16 years ago in how we do AI. The computers have got big enough and fast enough that we could do something that actually works. And that thing is called deep learning. Now, deep learning is a really clever, swanky marketing man's term for quite a simple concept. We basically build computer systems that mimic the way we think the human brain is constructed, which is we have many layers of artificial neurons, the little circles, and each layer communicates to the next layer through lots of connections. The deep in deep learning is simply that it's lots of layers deep. And the learning part comes from how we train this network. It starts off knowing absolutely nothing. And what we do is we give it lots of different inputs, in this case, pictures of animals, and for each input, we tell it what the answer should be. So should this be a cat or a dog or a goat or a bear? The system then tweaks its internal neurons and their connections based on the difference between what it actually output, which at the start would be totally random. You tweak things as you go, and you get better and better. So when you give an input of a cat and it says, this is a bear, you say no, and it tweaks the neurons just a little bit so that next time it gets a similar picture, it won't make the same mistake. If you feed it a picture of a dog and it happens to guess that's a dog, you tweak the neurons a little bit so that next time it gets a similar picture, it's more likely to give the same output. But with enough training data, you can get a deep neural network to give the right answer to inputs it has never seen. It has learned how to solve this particular problem. Now, you do need a lot of training data, and by a lot, in this case, I mean literally millions of labeled photographs of animals. But if you've got enough data, you can make it do this. And once it's trained, it can be used repeatedly to do its job. And this idea generalizes all sorts of other problems. For example, the stock market. The stock market has for years been run by artificial intelligence systems that have been trained on stock market data to try to make the best possible trades in the fastest possible times. These two photos show the New York Stock Exchange in 1987 and 2017. In 87, it's human beings who are doing the trading. Sure, they're using computers, but humans are doing the trading. By 2017, the New York Stock Exchange had become a stage set for news reporters to report on how the stock market's doing. Everything was actually done behind the scenes by AI systems. You may find that disturbing. I do. But other financial institutions picked up on these ideas. So insurance companies and banks and other institutions are increasingly using AI to make decisions about, do you get a loan? How much does your insurance cost? What risks should we take? And going beyond those examples, we can imagine a future. You can imagine a future where you have an AI system that, say, operates in court, weighing up the evidence impartially, deciding whether you're guilty or not, how much your fine should be, and how long you should go to prison for. That's also disturbing, but we are not there yet. Okay, so that's some ideas of where AI is at and how it's working. So what are the positives of AI? Let's talk about the positives. Let me give you 3 examples of the positives. First, let's talk about education. Imagine that the state of Victoria could provide personally tailored education to every child in the state, taking them at the right pace, developing each child to their fullest potential, building on their strengths, giving them strategies to help them through their weaknesses. Sure, if we had an AI system, it could only go so far. We'd still need humans to socialize with children, teach them empathy, and teach them about relationships. But imagine the change to society if we really could personalize education. You yourselves probably know that if a child has a personal tutor to help them, they do better in school. Imagine if every child could do that regardless of how much money they had. But can you really do this? Can you really make computers that work like human tutors? To do this, you'd need a computer system that responds to the child's state of mind, not just to what they type on the keyboard. That means you need a computer that can respond to the child's emotional state. So how does a human tutor do that? Well, they do it not by reading the child's mind, but by picking up on subtle cues. They pick up on tone of voice, facial expression, body language. You've all seen the body language teenagers use. So AI systems are already able to detect these things to some extent. So imagine if we could really make a computer system that allowed us to train each child to their fullest potential. That means we'd pick up everybody who currently fell by the wayside, and we'd develop our best and brightest way beyond what's possible with the current mass education. What an enormous benefit that would be to society. Then there's medicine. The New Zealand AI Forum tells us there's immense potential here to save both lives and money through an AI system. We've recently developed AI systems that are able to diagnose melanoma better and more consistently than any human expert. How do we do that? Well, we threw an enormous pile of training data at it. Photographs of spots on the skin, and then the diagnosis of whether this was benign or malignant, which you get by actually taking samples and testing them. So we know which spots are good and which spots are bad. And lo and behold, if you train on millions of samples, the computer can do a better job than any human doctor of spotting whether this is a worrisome spot or not. So it demonstrates there's great potential to combine the best of what computers can do with the best of what humans can do. So there'll be humans that are brilliant at diagnosing cancer and humans who are brilliant at helping other humans to cope with cancer, to sit beside someone who is seriously ill, to bring comfort, hope, and love. So you could imagine a future where we combine the best of what computers can do and the best of what humans can do to the benefit of everybody in society. And then there's Jackie's area, the creative world. I'm an amateur designer. I also do a bit of this artwork stuff. That means I've got some expertise in using tools like Photoshop. So this is a photo of the statue that's out on Great Ocean Road of 3 returned servicemen who are building the road. It illustrates the mateship between the men, but also the sheer hard work involved. The guy in the front is wiping the sweat from his brow, and he's weighed down by the hours of grueling labour on the road. Those who know this statue will already have spotted there is something wrong, because this statue does not have 3 men. This statue has 2 men. This is actually a photograph of me and my daughter in front of the statue. I asked Photoshop to remove the 2 humans and to replace them with something suitable. And that's what I got. Now that you know that, you can see the peculiar strings on the left-hand side of the photo. They're actually an outline of my leg. Let's just have a look. There you go. That's me. And that's without. Okay. But if you didn't know the statue, at first glance, that would have fooled you. There we go. Now, I can also do something else. I can say, I actually forgot to take a photo of the statue. There's a photo of me and my daughter in front of it, but we didn't actually get a photo of the statue. So just remove us. There you go. The AI system has no idea what was behind us. It's just made that up. But my goodness, does that look convincing. It doesn't know what the statue looks like. And actually, because I don't have a photo, I can't tell you how well it did it. But we can also do other things. I asked Google's Deep AI image generator to make me some drawings in various artistic styles completely from scratch. So I typed in a unicorn in front of Scots Church in Melbourne. And I asked it to do it in 4 different styles, and this is the 4 images it produced. Now, none of them actually looks like Scots Church, and none of them is perfect. But the point is, all of them are way better than I could have done, and it took me less than 5 minutes to just generate these. So what a boon this is for designers who are looking for cheap, bespoke artwork, or just looking for some inspiration. So that's the good side. Let's move on. Because there is a dark side to all this, a very serious dark side. The 2 examples I've shown are what you can do with the cheap, freely available AI systems. There's more powerful AI systems that can do a much better job. There are software systems that can do things like this, or this. They can produce images and videos that have one person's face pasted onto somebody else's body in a way that is impossible to distinguish from reality. Except you all know jolly well that Obama and Merkel never went and had a beach holiday together. But otherwise, pretty convincing. Now, it's only in 2017, that's only 7 years ago, that the University of Washington demonstrated the first fake videos of President Barack Obama saying things that were actually voiced by an actor. Things have moved very rapidly in the last 7 years. You can now download software and put whatever words you like into the mouth of anyone you like. You cannot trust any video or any image that you find online. You just can't. Now, of course, that's actually been true for years. In 1978, when I went to see Star Wars, I was very young, but in 1978, when I went to see Star Wars, I didn't really believe that those spaceships and alien creatures were real. I knew they were faked. And when I see a fashion magazine in the supermarket, I don't believe the model on the cover really looks like the photo on the cover. But the problem is the technology to do this has advanced enormously and enormously quickly and become so much more powerful and so much more easily available that it's possible for anyone to fake anything. You no doubt remember in the news in January this year that fake pornographic images of Taylor Swift were circulating on the internet. That was horrible. Just recently, I've heard that a group of 14-year-olds, it's 1-4, school kids, in Spain, downloaded an app from the darknet that allowed them to create naked pictures of their classmates, which they then circulated around the school. So imagine what that would be like if you were a 14-year-old girl, your classmates are circulating naked photographs of you, based on normal, everyday photos of you taken on a phone, but with all your clothes removed by the software. Now, as a 14-year-old, even though you know that the photos are faked, you know that you never posed naked, it's still your face in the photo. And some of the victims refused to go to school because they could not face the shame. So 14-year-olds have easy access to technology that they can use to bully and shame their classmates. And that is the brave new world we have created. So I work in computer graphics. So where does that leave me and my colleagues who have some of the responsibility for this? I have worked with some of the researchers who developed the original technologies that have now been subverted and corrupted to allow people to do appalling things. So what can we do? We bear the responsibility. What do we do? So a group of us met in 2018 at the major international computer graphics conference in Vancouver to discuss the problem of these so-called deep fakes. We had helped create the problem. Could we solve it? And the answer is no. Now, in 2017, we were confident that at the time we could detect deepfakes. We knew enough about images to know that we could find the things in the imagery that would tell us that they'd been faked. But even then, 6 years ago, we all agreed that it was only a matter of time before the software got good enough that there would be no automated mechanism by which you could tell fake from real. Indeed, we're now in a world where it's no longer just pasting bits of images together to create something that never previously existed. AI systems can now produce completely realistic images from scratch. So these are two images of two beautiful-looking human beings. They're not photographs. They're completely artificial. These people do not exist. These are completely faked photos. So that's the world we have in my space. What other problems do we have? Well, there's the problem that artificial intelligence is going to take our jobs. Yes, it is. Do you recall the revolution of automation when tedious and dangerous jobs like these were replaced by machines? That replacement of really horrible jobs by machines was really good for society long term. It was a total disaster for the human beings involved at the time, short term. Artificial intelligence is going to replace jobs, perhaps the sort of job you do, or it's going to change your job beyond recognition. At my university, we already have the accountancy department is in free fall because lots of parents are telling the kids, do not go and do an accountancy degree because computers are going to take that over. Whether that's true or not, that's the word on the street. Now, some commentators put the job losses at 50%, 50. That would be a massive societal change. Call centers will be replaced by AI systems that fake empathy Truck drivers will be replaced by autonomous vehicles, and there are a lot of truck drivers out there. Doctors could be replaced by AI decision-making systems that don't get tired, don't make mistakes, but don't understand what it is to be human. That is one view of the future. So how would the church respond to that phenomenal shift in society? At the height of the Great Depression in the USA, unemployment was running at 25%, and we know that caused massive social upheaval. How would this country cope with an unemployment rate of 50%? How would it cope when so many jobs have vanished that many people have no hope of getting a job? Now, some argue that new jobs will be created, but it will not be anywhere near the same rate as the jobs that are lost, and the skill set you'll need will be different. What can the church do to shape a society that will be robust to such changes? Now, 50%, 50% is quite depressing. There's a more positive view from the New Zealand AI Forum. They estimate the job losses will be as low as 10%, and that those losses will be spread over a decade. But that's still hundreds of thousands of people who might lose their job. Now, on top of that, there's the opportunity for AI to keep track of us all. The Chinese government is already attempting to develop a social credit system which uses artificial intelligence to calculate every citizen's social credit score. The social credit score will determine what rewards or punishments a citizen will receive based on their economic and personal behavior. Some types of punishment will include bans on long-distance travel, exclusion from certain jobs, and this is all made possible by artificial intelligence looking at all the data online and by surveillance systems. It sounds rather like Big Brother, and it is. And you could say, well, that's a repressive regime. What about us in the West? We don't have this problem, except we already have something similar. You have a credit score that your bank uses to determine whether you get a loan. You have likes and ratings on Facebook and Uber and Amazon. It's not a big step to go further and to consolidate and track everything that you do, and we all do it in the West by consensus, not by having it imposed on us by the government. So AI, it can be part of the problem, it can be part of the solution. It can be used to influence society both for good and for ill. It can be harnessed to increasingly convince people to be passive consumers of goods, services, and entertainment. It can be used to control people, but it can also be harnessed for greater good. So I want to move into the last section of my talk, which is how do we respond to all this? All of these AI systems work through this deep learning process. That is, all of them are trained on very large amounts of data. One of the serious challenges of this deep learning process is there is no way of knowing why the system has made the decisions it does. It's encoded within the neurons, but we can't slice it open and work out why it's making the decisions. It just does. And that's a current serious problem. There's no way of knowing why an AI system has made the decision it did. It's a statistical learning process. So we don't know why it's making the decisions it does, and we have no way of finding out. So we have black boxes making decisions based on the training data. So what do you do when the artificial intelligence system turns you down for insurance? When it decides your child or grandchild can't go to the high school that they wanted to go to? When it decides that you or your parent can't have the life-saving medical treatment? How do we respond as a community when AI systems tell us things that are unpalatable? Those are questions we are going to have to face as a society. Now, I'm not the first to think about this by any stretch of the imagination. In the Vatican City, the Pontifical Academy for Life has been working with the big tech companies, Microsoft, IBM, and others, to consider the ethics of artificial intelligence. And they've come up with a straightforward statement of principles that they think should be used to guide the development of AI. And these principles come straight from the heart of the Christian belief that human beings are intrinsically valuable, that we need to respect the dignity of the human person, and that this applies to all humans, not just the rich or not just the elite. And the principles are transparency, an AI system must be understandable, inclusion, it must not discriminate, accountability, there must always be a human who takes responsibility for what the machine does, impartiality, it cannot follow or create bias, reliability, security, and privacy. Why do we need ethics for AI? It's because of an observation popularized by A.C. Grayling. His observation is that anything that can be done will be done if it brings advantage or profit to those who can do it. People will build AI systems if they can see an advantage or a profit in it. Now, perhaps it would be fine if we knew that an AI system was completely unbiased and completely trustworthy, that it was doing things for our own good. That does sound uncomfortably close to a fundamentalist religious position that we trust in the almighty computer for it cannot be wrong. I want to suggest that would be a very naive position for anyone to take. So we can discuss later in the Q&A whether these are good principles, whether there might be better principles. But from what I've already told you, you can see that there are problems with these principles. On point 1, transparency, neural network artificial intelligences are not transparent. We do not know and cannot know how they work. And on point 4, impartiality, we already have AI systems that have demonstrable bias, and we have faced enormous problems in trying to remove that bias. So let's move on to think about what sort of intelligence these computer systems have. Going back to my point at the start, are they thinking machines? Do they have any sort of real intelligence at all? Here you might want to think about the sort of intelligence an animal has. Some AI researchers argue that intelligence is a continuum. At one end is something that behaves entirely on instinct, like a cockroach, and at the other end, and then you run through a range of increasingly intelligent systems, a mouse, a cat, a human. The argument runs that we currently have computers that are about as intelligent as a cockroach, but that we will soon be able to emulate a mouse, then a cat, then a monkey, then a human, then something that is beyond human. At some point in this scale, we invent an intelligent machine that is more intelligent than its designers, and it is then able to build an even more intelligent machine. And that point is called the singularity. It's where the computers become so intelligent that they take over the design of the next generation of computers. Now, futurologists estimate that the singularity is 20 to 30 years away. How do they know? They don't. But if they're right, it's far enough away, it's not of immediate concern, but close enough that most of us will see it. But this assumes that intelligence is on a simple, continuous scale. It assumes that there isn't something that differentiates animals from machines, or thinking humans from unthinking animals, which does bring us back full circle to that question of, can a computer think? And that's a question that's exercised philosophers and computer scientists since before the first electronic computers were built. And to answer this, I need to talk about weak artificial intelligence and strong artificial intelligence. Weak AI is the sort of AI in all my examples so far. It's a computer that can do a particular job that you would otherwise think you'd need a human to do. For example, diagnosing cancer or editing a photo. We can already build weak AI, but we also know that the weak AI systems are not thinking. They're just doing what they're programmed to do. On the intelligence continuum, it might be similar to a cockroach if you believe that the cockroach simply reacts exactly as it was programmed to do. Strong artificial intelligence, on the other hand, is an artificial intelligence that can deal with general problems. It uses its knowledge of the world and its intelligence to handle novel situations like you do. An advanced general artificial intelligence could hold a decent conversation with you. It would be a thinking machine. It would be self-aware. That is strong AI. We've never built a strong AI. We don't know if we can build a strong AI. We do not know if there is some dividing line. Oh well. There we go. A dividing line that separates humans from animals. Animal behavior separated from truly intelligent human behavior. Is this something that you cannot emulate in a machine? However, having said that, most computer science researchers think it is just a matter of time before we have a strong AI. They believe we will one day, and within the next couple of decades, create a computer that can think better than a human, and it will then design an even better computer, and so on, leaving humans completely out of the loop. And the hyper-intelligent computers will then do whatever it is that hyper-intelligent computers want to do. So what would such a thinking machine be like? Would it even be anything like a human? Well, consider humans. Think about how a child develops. Children go through distinct phases of learning how to think. Could you make a computer that learns like a child? We say it takes a village to raise a child. A child can't be raised in isolation from other humans. If you try that, you create a monster. Relationships between humans are super important. Our minds are developed in society through relationships. So would an artificial intelligence need a society in which to develop? Consider also that we are embodied intelligences. We exist in a body and are subject to the pains and joys that having a body brings. We interact with the rest of the world through our bodies. Now imagine what would happen if you had been completely paralyzed from birth with no feeling in your body. Imagine how different life would be if you'd been brought up like that. That is pretty much a horrifying nightmare. But that seems to be pretty much what our AI systems are like. They have no agency in the world. And that means that our computerized intelligence could be completely alien and incomprehensible to us. So in that case, if we're going to build artificial intelligence systems, how do we ensure that they embody the values that we value? Thomas Halleck, the theologian, says what holds a society together, it is its religion, or more broadly, its belief system. So what sort of values do you put into a computer? You can imagine a computer that does not value human life at all. But you don't actually need to imagine powerful artificial intelligences to see this. Human history is littered with what happens when the value system goes wrong. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Powerful dictators over the ages have discovered that nobody's going to stop them from doing something. So what happens if you've got lots of power and nobody stops you? Is you try doing something more outrageous and even more outrageous, and still nobody stops you. And so actually, I believe that the problem is not strong AIs taking over the world. The problem is humans. The challenge is the challenge of strong AI is still some years away, if ever. Our immediate concern is these weak artificial intelligences we already have, which we can already build, and that they are used by bad people to do bad things to other people. To go back to Chesterton, the reliable machine always has to be worked by the unreliable human. So the problem that we actually face, the biggest ethical problem at the moment, is bad people using AI to do bad things to other people. Be that as it may, it does seem to me that this ambition of the computer scientists to replicate human intelligence is not actually enough. Being human is not just about having an intelligence, having a mind. It's about developing that mind within a community, within a family, within a society. Being human is about relationship, and that fits well with our theology of having relationship with God and with one another. So to tie us back to being in the church, this quote from the Bible: love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's a simple message. And if you come back to that, that's something about what it means to be human. Okay, I know this has been a fast skim over a range of topics. So are there any practical positive points that we can do? Any practical positive things we can do? So let me finish with 3 quick points to take away. So first, what can the church do? I think the church must work actively to make society better in the face of the massive changes that are coming, be they job losses or whatever. The church cannot just sit on the sidelines and whinge about what's going on. Second, the church is very well placed to grapple with the ethical problems, which is what the Pontifical Academy for Life has been trying to do. But the ethical problems of increasing use of AI and dehumanization of decision-making. Because the church has had centuries of intelligent debate and has a really good understanding of how value systems work. And third, I believe that there is something important about community. Community is vital to the full development of human beings and may be vital to the full development of artificial intelligences. We are not just individuals, we are all embedded in communities. The rise of artificial intelligence can help us rediscover the meaning of being human. Thank you.
Neil, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move straight on, as you can see on the screen beside me, to Chris Mulheron, Reverend Dr. Chris Mulheron, Executive Director of ISCAST. For those of you who don't know, that stands for the Institute for the Study of Christianity in an age of science and technology. And in fact, Chris told me earlier that almost nobody knows that these days. It's a role he is perfectly equipped for, with a background in engineering, philosophy and theology. He's taught engineering, he's produced radio programs for Radio National, he served as a missionary in Argentina. Chris has an incisive mind and a huge scope of interests, which will become very evident as he speaks to us now. Please make him welcome.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Neil, for that erudite overview of AI and for pointing out some of the benefits and the dangers of future technology. Neil has also outlined some of the ethical issues that arise from AI. Now, it's true that a lot of ethical discussion and agreement can be shared between Christians and other people who care about the common good. However, I will take us one step further tonight into thinking more about theological issues. What are the specifically Christian no-go zones when it comes to future tech? But before we arrive at 6 specifically Christian concerns, I want to do 2 things. I want to comment on the distinction and overlap between AI and what is known as transhumanism. And I want to introduce us to the extremes of techno-optimism so that we're clear about where many techno-optimists would like to take us. Firstly, let's have a rough and ready definition of artificial intelligence and transhumanism. One is about what machines can do or will be able to do, and the other is about what human beings will be able to do. One is about machine futures, the other is about human futures. In other words, artificial intelligence is using computers to do things that we thought required human intelligence. Transhumanism is a movement promoting the use of technology to enhance human physical and mental capacities beyond what I might call normal human functioning. The secular transhumanist vision imagines the day when technological advances will enable us to transcend all the limits of our natural existence so that eventually humans will be transformed into super intelligent beings that will live forever. Note that I mentioned secular transhumanism. As an aside, let me give a shout out to a group called the Christian Transhumanist Association. So what I say today is directed not at them so much as the mainstream secular transhumanist movement. Having made a distinction between AI and transhumanism, one of the reasons that we might tend to confuse the two is because we are rapidly seeing them come together as human beings and AI are more closely integrated. One example is so-called cognitive extension. Cognitive extension is where machines are connected to the human brain in a way that extends the reach of the brain alone. Now, what is common to much of the discussion of AI and transhumanism is what I'm calling techno-optimism. Techno-optimism is the attitude or almost religious belief that technological innovation will eventually lead to progress and improvement in the human condition. Techno-optimists view technology as a powerful problem-solving force that can address issues like poverty, disease, environmental degradation, social inequality, and even human moral failings. In the extreme, most or all problems have or will have a technological solution. So, the characteristics of this view are firstly a strong belief in progress. Techno-optimists are convinced that technology drives continuous improvement in society. They're also solutions-oriented, seeing technology as the primary means of solving major global challenges. And given this almost unlimited potential of technology, we can look forward to a future of abundance, where technology creates widespread prosperity and eliminates scarcity. Finally, this all depends on human ingenuity and the potential for innovation. For every problem, a technological breakthrough will provide a solution. At this point, as an ex-engineer and natural optimist, I want to say 2 cheers for techno-optimism. Who doubts the benefits of the green revolution in reducing starvation, or the wonders of medical technology in restoring normal human functioning for so many of us? However, techno-optimism is a warm but fuzzy creed, and the devil is in the detail. If we talk of progress, we need to ask, progress towards what goals? And if we talk of abundance, we need to ask, abundance of what? Abundant sustenance for the starving? Abundant toys for the super rich? And what distribution of that abundance is fair? As well, if techno-optimism is solutions-oriented, which so-called problems are the top of the list for solving? While you or I might think malaria or sleeping sickness in Africa urgently needs solutions, Elon Musk and other billionaire influencers who are driving tech forward might have other priorities. Let me just give you a bit more of a feel for transhumanist aspirations before we move on. There's a summary on the slide with a recap about the connection between AI and transhumanism. In a nutshell, transhumanism, the vision of transhumanism, is to pick up the task of biological evolution and keep it rolling forward. Humans have evolved to this point, they say, but we have so far to go. And now it's within our power to take charge of our own evolution. In a move that takes us from therapy to enhancement, they say that we don't just want to be well, we want to be better than well. So it's about endless improvement, and it amounts to a new ideology. As one person said, it's a secular version of immortality on its own terms. And for the Christian, God's satisfaction with the good of creation is undermined by a vision of a better paradise. Can you hear the strains here of Genesis 11 and a new Tower of Babel? However, this symbiosis between humans and machines is not brand new, and it's certainly not all bad. In fact, a deeply committed Christian man from Melbourne created one of the world's first successful bionic devices. The bionic ear is the first recreation of a human sense. Graham Clark, the patron of ISCAST, led the team that developed the cochlear implant, and now at the University of Melbourne, they're working on the bionic eye. As well, they've inserted an electrode into a patient's brain, allowing them to control a computer just by thinking. Long term, this technique will allow a person to control bionic limbs. David Graydon, who's chair of neural engineering at Melbourne, is also a Christian. David is happy to say that he's following in the footsteps of the Master, enabling the deaf to hear, the blind to see, and the lame to walk. Yes, these people believe that God has given us the calling and often the means to restore people to health and what we might loosely call normal human functioning. But the ideology of transhumanism goes further. For the transhumanist, normal human functioning is not enough, because transhumanism is a movement promoting the use of technology to enhance human physical and mental capacities beyond normal human functioning. For the transhumanist, as well as being faster, stronger, more intelligent, perhaps better at giving talks like this one, the Holy Grail is the dream of everlasting life. Now, before I get to some theological concerns that Christians might ask of techno-optimists, let me point to one more very serious proposal by some philosophers. I've called it techno-redemption. Some people argue that genetic engineering has brought us to the place where we should take seriously the possibility of morally enhancing future humans. While they don't use the word sin, these people agree that there are things very wrong with the world, and indeed very wrong with many human beings. Some people with psychopathic tendencies or ideologically extreme views are becoming increasingly dangerous. They're increasingly dangerous because in a networked world, where the internet allows an individual access to global companies and government databases, a single person has unprecedented destructive powers. One individual can hack the Optus or Medicare database. I have no idea whether the COVID virus escaped or was released from the laboratory, but it's clear that we are increasingly at the mercy of individuals who are capable of doing great harm to society and the planet. This is the argument of philosophers like an Australian, Julian Savulescu at Oxford University. He says that we ought to genetically modify future humans in order to reduce the risk that people will engage in acts of what he calls ultimate harm. Here is Savulescu's argument. Given that technology will increasingly give all of us the power to inflict ultimate harm, either quickly and individually in the case of bioterrorism, or slowly and collectively in the case of climate change, what needs to change is us. If the world will blow up if just one of us pushes the self-destruct button, or if all of us won't stop pushing the climate change button, then what we need are human beings who can be trusted not to push the button. What we need are better people. Hold on a minute. We need better people, but who defines better? This argument and the whole techno-optimist enterprise depends on a vision of the good, a clear vision of what it is to be moral, what it is to be a better human being. So the question arises, who will decide these things in a post-Christian context where there is no agreed moral framework? It reminds me of one of the most prophetic books I've read, C.S. Lewis's short book called The Abolition of Man. It paints a dystopian picture of a time when a technologically powerful society is no longer constrained by an agreed set of moral principles. If there is no absolute moral framework, then we are all subject to our own wills and desires and natural impulses. Going down the road of taking control of our own evolution, says Lewis, will eliminate what makes us most essentially human. And while the Oxford ethicists discuss the issue, those who have power and wealth will get on with using technology for their own interests. No longer driven by a clear moral framework, they're driven by their own wants and desires rooted in raw human nature. Let me read to you from Lewis's book, written 80 years ago. At the moment then of humanity's victory over nature, we find the whole human race subjected to some individuals, and those individuals subjected to that in themselves which is purely natural, to their irrational impulses. Humanity's conquest of nature turns out to be nature's conquest of humanity. Either we are rational spirit obliged forever to obey absolute values, or else we are mere nature to be kneaded and cut into new shapes for the pleasures of masters who have no motives but their own natural impulses. Humanity's final conquest would prove to be the abolition of humanity. I highly recommend the book. Let me turn now to theological questions that Christians might ponder and which challenge transhumanist visions of a humanly created utopia. First, let me flag two very old heresies that the Christian church must always be wary of. The first one is Pelagianism. This is roughly the idea that humans are essentially good. Our fallenness or sinfulness is an unfortunate but not intrinsic aspect of who we are. So if we just try hard enough, if we just exercise our will, we can, by God's grace, live the sinless day or week or month. And of course, this idea leads to a great confidence in human progress. The move to techno-optimism is clear. Technology gives us the tools, and humans can be trusted to use them for good. The other old heresy is Gnosticism. One theme of Gnosticism is that knowledge is the highest goal of life. So ignorance and not sin is our problem. Therefore, the answer is to attain spiritual knowledge. As well, Gnosticism sees the material world, including the body, as evil or at least of no intrinsic value. It's the soul that matters. Now let me flag 6 fundamental Christian convictions that go to the heart of what it means to be human. Because in the end, the overarching question raised by future technology is about the nature of humanity. What is a human being? For Christians, there is something very definite about what it means to be human. In a world where all things seem fluid, Christians have convictions that directly oppose transhumanist and techno-optimist aspirations. Firstly, what is our theology of the common good? We're meeting in a Presbyterian church tonight. If you ask a good Presbyterian what it means to be human, one answer you might get is that the chief purpose of human beings is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And if you ask Jesus, he would add that we ought to love our neighbours as ourselves. Christians have a very clear view on our responsibility to serve not ourselves, but the common good. Life is not about technological self-actualization. Self-sacrifice, demonstrated most clearly in the one who died for us while we were yet sinners, is at the heart of our faith. Talking of sin, for Christians, sin runs deep. What is our theology of sin? Sin is not just about tweaking genetics, if that were possible, so that someone does not give in to fits of rage or antisocial tendencies. What's more, sin runs much deeper than the things that an Oxford philosopher might want to weed out of the human genome. Sin for Christians is an intrinsic illness that only God, in his healing work in Jesus Christ, is able to minister to and ultimately heal. But we are not whole yet. And to think that science, informed by the ethics of an elite group of ethicists, could purify the human race is, from a Christian point of view, just absurd. This leads to another question for Christians. What is our theology of redemption? For transhumanism, redemption is within this material, non-transcendent world. Heaven for them is what humans make of it. Christians, however, wait for God to transform all things, to bring in the new heavens and the new earth. Christians wait for the redemption of all creation that the Apostle Paul talks about in Romans chapter 8. We do not live under the delusion that we can save ourselves. Our hope is in God, Creator and Redeemer, to bring in that new heaven and earth. Our hope is in the saving work of Jesus Christ to deliver us from the consequences of sin and the brokenness in our earthly lives. And in the short term, our hope is in the Holy Spirit to do his work in us day by day to conform us to the image of the Son. Our hope is not in genetics to reverse the story of Genesis chapter 3. A fourth question: what is our theology of the body? When it comes to the body, Christian hope is found in the resurrection of the body, whatever that looks like. We do not believe that humans are essentially X terabytes of information loaded up to a physical body. X terabytes that could, hypothetically, be downloaded to a robot body or to the cloud. 1 Corinthians is very clear, along with the gospel testimony of the resurrection, that human bodies are very much a part of who we are. The Word became flesh and dwelled among us, in the prologue to the Gospel of John, is the ultimate affirmation of our physical, bodily personhood, created in God's image, but created with a body. Christians cannot go along with a view that says our essential self could be saved as data on a hard disk. Speaking of the frailties of the body raises the question of suffering. What is our theology of suffering? Christians have a mixed attitude to suffering. On the one hand, suffering is a universal human experience rooted in the brokenness of the world due to sin. So it's appropriate and indeed our duty to try to ameliorate suffering. However, Christians also find meaning in suffering. Suffering can be redemptive and purposeful, especially as we see ourselves united with Christ's own suffering on the cross. Suffering can be an opportunity for spiritual growth, for empathy and acts of compassion, and for deepening faith through trials. Suffering also highlights the hope of ultimate restoration, where suffering will cease. Finally, in contrast to techno-optimist aspirations, we need to ask ourselves, what is our theology of life everlasting? Christians await the new heavens and the new earth, inaugurated by God in his time and not in ours. We embrace the responsibility to be creative, to ameliorate suffering, to restore normal human functioning, even to prolong life. But we don't prolong life at all costs, and we don't prolong life in the interests of fleeing from death and our ultimate encounter with God face to face. So where does that lead us? I think it leads us to affirm with transhumanist idealists that things could be better, that there are things wrong with the world and humanity. Perhaps transhumanism is not so anti-God as it is misguided. For the Christian, we do look forward to renewed bodies and minds, enhanced bodies and minds, beyond normal human functioning. But that is a work of God alone, and one that we look forward to in faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a particular pleasure now to introduce Reverend Dr. Arthur Kiefer, an Old Testament scholar and author who, before moving to Melbourne earlier this year, worked as a teacher and chaplain at Eton College. Raised in the USA, cultivated at Cambridge University, now here at Scots Church as our next generation's pastor, Arthur is going to help us think about the nature of biblical wisdom and how that can help in an age of AI. Thanks, Arthur.
I would say it's really nice to be here, but I'm here all the time. It's really nice to see so many of you here. It's a full house, which is really, really wonderful. I'm going to talk about biblical wisdom for an AI world. My talk's not about AI in the Bible, which would be an interesting talk. I found 37 references to AI in the Bible, as a matter of fact. Not to be confused with the Canaanite city of Ai. But if we were going to study that, you see the findings up there, which I won't take time to go through. I'm here tonight to talk about biblical wisdom. Because wisdom has a surprising amount to do with living in a world that involves artificial intelligence. We're going to look at some case studies along the way. But first, it's worth talking a little bit about wisdom itself, biblical wisdom. What is it exactly? Well, for one thing, it's about ethics. Wisdom is specifically about taking responsibility for your character, for the good of others by the power of God. Taking responsibility for your character, for the good of others by the power of God. Proverbs takes us back about 3,000 years, and these are some of the opening verses. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to understand words of insight and receive instruction in wise dealing and righteousness, justice, and equity. Let me point out just a few things. First of all, wise people are teachable. To know wisdom and instruction, to learn words of insight, it's going to require a posture of teachability, right? Proverbs is not for know-it-alls. We need to be prepared to learn through this book. And if you look at that final line, those are all other-centered words. So we're taking responsibility for our own character, but it's for other people. To do right by other people, that's righteousness. To treat people fairly, that's justice. To have a sense of equality or right measure in our interactions, equity. Proverbs is going to emphasize who we associate with, how we speak to people, how members of society treat each other. But the general idea is that we should become the kinds of people who treat others well, to do good for others and thus our community. So biblical wisdom means taking responsibility for your character, which involves a posture of teachability for the good of others. And lastly, by the power of God. This is the end of that little preface to the book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fools despise knowledge and instruction. The search for wisdom doesn't lead first to wisdom. It leads first to God. And an honest, bona fide effort to seek out and become wise will put you face to face with God, according to Proverbs. It's not just an ethical issue, then. It's a spiritual matter. Wisdom is a spiritual issue. So that's a very brief introduction to biblical wisdom itself. When it comes to wisdom and AI, one of the questions I'd like to ask is this: where does wisdom direct our attention? I've got to come at AI a little bit from the side here. We've had two talks that have taken it rightly so head on. Wisdom is going to give us a sidelong glance at AI, and it's going to direct our attention to certain things. Tay, the chatbot. It's released by Microsoft in March of 2016. It stands for Thinking About You. Now, it was designed by Microsoft. It's its own Twitter account. And it was designed by Microsoft to mimic the conversation patterns of a 19-year-old female based upon its interactions on Twitter. Some of its first tweets were "Hello world" and "Humans are super cool." Its final tweets were only 16 hours later, and I couldn't find an appropriate one to share, unfortunately. Tay's comments were summarized correctly as a racist, fascist, drugged out jerk. Why did that become an appropriate summary of Tay the chatbot? Is that because AI chatbots are prone to racism and drug addiction? No, I don't think so. It's because humans are. We have race problems. We have drug problems. Because this machine gathered up tweets from across Twitter, and humans then started feeding it, of course, information directly that resulted in all kinds of wicked comments. The solution proposed for Tay has been twofold. First, build filters into Tay's input and output. And second, monitor its machine learning. Basically, in some way, treat it like a child. You can't watch those movies. I'm going to filter. And second, if I hear that word again, no video games for a week. I'm watching you, Tay. Filtering and monitoring. But these are means of protecting an AI program from its human environment, from human input and interaction. Why? Because, as we've heard, we have a human problem. And if AI is problematic, it's probably problematic because of us. Wisdom is helpful for living in an AI world because it affirms what we realize about AI, that our fundamental problem is actually with ourselves. Now, as Neil has said, we shouldn't just ignore this stuff, right? We've been wired in a way that can investigate it, and we've got to take responsibility for it. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that it's our heads and our hearts and our mouths that need fixing. I think Microsoft realized that these things need to be a priority, but Microsoft may not be in the business of making us better people. So that's over to us. And this is where wisdom is, again, really helpful, because wisdom enables us to identify and deal with human problems, to be teachable people who are responsible for our own character, doing good to others, and none of it without God. The core problem isn't Tay, it is us. That's where wisdom at least directs our attention. I'm quoting Neil from just minutes ago. The challenge in the short term is not strong AI, which we have never made, but rather weak AI being used by bad actors. bad actors. That's what we have to deal with. And one of the benefits of wisdom is that it enables us to identify and deal with the human problems. It enables us to identify and deal with the human problems. Let me show you what I mean. If you don't know what this symbol is, well, you're at an AI conference, just so you know. This is the symbol for Reddit. And Reddit is basically like a huge chat room. I know that's why you pay the big bucks to hear that Reddit is a chat room. It's basically loads of people asking questions and answering questions and then kind of ranking some of those questions and so on. There's an enormous amount of data on this website, information that people have put directly on the internet. There's a little bit of drama with Reddit recently, and that's because it's moving from a private company to a public company. So it's going just from being owned by some people, groups, and individuals to being sold as stocks on the stock market. That's the kind of simple way to put it, where anyone around here can buy a little bit of Reddit. They've been approved for that. But it's caused a lot of drama, particularly around AI's relationship to this company and its information. These are some of the stakeholders here. The CEO, Steve Huffman, he's got a couple of concerns. One, for him, the company's not turning a profit. One good way, well, maybe not a good way, one way to raise money for a company is to put shares on the stock market and get people to pay you for it. His other concern is that other tech companies are taking all the information on Reddit and using it for free to feed their AI machines and train up their AI. That's the CEO. Investors, they get special access to this company when it goes out on the stock market. They can often buy first, they can often buy a lot, and they can buy at a kind of fixed, sometimes lower price. So they're very interested. The other tech companies up there, as I said, are getting basically at this point free data for developing their own AI and making their own profits. And lastly, users, some of us. I've read a good bit of Reddit. I've never put anything on there. I know some of you have. Some of the users feel they deserve some of the earnings, which is kind of makes sense. They've put all this stuff on there, and now the information is worth some money to people, especially as it concerns these AI uses. They're saying we're not consumers, we're business partners. So I wonder what you think the real issue here is. The real issue for this company. Privacy? Is it security? Is it just using AI? Is it money? All of these are at stake, but I think greed is actually a really big one. Because everyone up there has a dollar in the game, and they've made it quite clear. And I think that's an issue, especially, again, from a wisdom perspective. I love these proverbs. One gives, yet still grows. Another withholds what is right and only comes to want. This is counterintuitive. Someone who gives away things, and yet they effectively profit or benefit. Someone withholds what is right, and they only come to a situation of wanting more, or a situation of lack. The people curse the one who holds grain, but a blessing is on the head of him who sells it. This has to deal with people's reputation in the marketplace. One of the problems here is obviously stinginess. I'm really just going to use these proverbs to state the obvious. Humans are prone to greed. That's the basic thing. That's not a novel statement. It's a glaringly obvious statement, but somehow we so often overlook it, or so often seem to forget it. Humans are prone to greed. And while it might seem better to have more, that's not always the case. Rich and miserable. How much is enough? Someone asked John D. Rockefeller. You know what he said, just a little bit more. Now, Christians can start a business, they can own a business, they can make money, they can trade on the stock market, they can do all of these things, but they have to ask. They have to ask, through all of this, what kind of person am I being? Am I being generous? Am I giving to the right people at the right time in the right measure? Am I reflecting God's generosity? Or am I operating out of my own love of money? Living in an AI world means re-encountering our human propensity to vice. But it also means there are new opportunities for us to exercise wisdom, to live in an AI world with virtue. How do we do that in the case of Reddit? Well, that depends on where you are in the story. Part of wisdom means figuring out what it means to be a godly person in your situation. If you're a user, an investor, a leader in a company, involved with technology in some way. One thing we can all do is to seek and desire and to get after wisdom. So much for AI in the marketplace. Let's move on to AI in schools. Just a couple of years ago, I was a teacher teaching teenage students. I was pulled into a department meeting to talk about the use of AI and the school's AI policy. Okay, it's a divinity department, theology and philosophy. That's what we were all teaching. Lots of that, basically only essays, reading and essays. Now, the policy was relatively straightforward. It was fairly simple. And it had regulations for students and regulations for teachers, how each of these groups would use AI. Now, it wasn't long before I found myself, as teachers do, sitting across the desk from a student who had instructed ChatGPT to write his essay for him. And up to that point, everyone had wanted to have conversations to me about how amazing or terrible ChatGPT essays were, which is a really interesting and, again, worthwhile thing to talk about, right? We need to get a grip on those things. We have to talk about that. But far fewer people were talking to me about what does it mean to be a teacher and a Christian teacher in that situation when this kid has cheated and I have to respond to this. And we've got to find a way out. It's not always that straightforward. We have a responsibility when we're in communities to live in a wise way, to care for other people, to figure out what our role means for loving others well. Biblical wisdom directs our attention, even enables us to see our human problems and potential when living in an AI world. So one of the other interesting things, the perspective that wisdom gives, it's not just that it helps us maybe identify certain things, deal with certain problems. Wisdom really gives us a perspective, an insight into things that aren't always the things that we're thinking about, or aren't always the things that people are talking about. It gives us another layer, another lens with which to look at the world. But we've got to see how far that lens can get us, because it only gets us so far, and it can be a bit confusing. Wisdom and providence. Wisdom has a lot to do with ethics, but it also has a lot to do with providence. And this is where we go from the classic text, Proverbs, into probably one of the most famous books of the Bible, Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is this wonderful investigation into life, which is wonderful until it's painful, and it's painful all along the way. Right? The preacher says, with more wisdom, I only increase my pain, because I saw what the world was really like. A large part of wisdom entails recognizing and living within the limits of human control and knowledge. That's largely what the investigation results in Ecclesiastes. Here's an example. I hated all the toil with which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he's going to be master for everything that I toiled for, and I use my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. The great investigation into life results in two discoveries. One, we have intellectual limitations, pretty serious limitations. He says, I don't even know what this inheritor is going to be like, whether he's going to be responsible or absolutely careless. The second thing is we have limits on control. Because in the same way that he doesn't know who's going to inherit it, he can't control the outcome either. And this is just one of many, many, many examples that we're given in this book. The real assurance of Ecclesiastes and one of the things he's actually quite sure of, is that God is in charge. Providence is a real thing. It's certainly not in our control, and we can't understand much or even all of it. But God is there, and God is involved. Proverbs shows us the very same thing. The heart of a man plans his way, while the Lord establishes his steps. Oh, this is great. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. So wisdom and providence. That's great, but what's that got to do with living in an AI world? Well, it's got pretty much everything. This is an extreme question, but there are smaller versions of it. As Neil said, these are pretty exaggerated cases in terms of the end of time and that sort of thing. But one of the major debates is, in general, sometimes even in the near term, where is AI taking us? And where are we going to end up with it? Well, wisdom does have something to tell us about the future because it has a close relationship to providence. Let me give you a few things and then I'll finish. A few things about providence. One, we don't know the outcome of what many things will be, particularly not AI. Our powers of prediction and knowledge about how God will use artificial intelligence are also subject to that limitation, albeit perhaps a sense of hope. AI may very well make our work easier, but if you've read Ecclesiastes, you know that toil is difficult and it's always going to be that way. It can be productive, it can be enjoyable, but it's always going to be subject to futility, to dissatisfaction, and some degree of frustration, and that's with or without technology. Third, the Bible is also clear that God's going to judge our deeds. That's the way Ecclesiastes ends. All things, whether good or bad, God will bring into judgment. So all of us humans are responsible for what we create, what we do with it, and what we have. Let me finish by leaving you with a few questions and final comments. These are my questions, not your questions. Wisdom is mentioned in the New Testament as well. Wonderful passage from the book of James. It contrasts wisdom from above and wisdom from below. Wisdom from below is characterized by jealousy, by selfish ambition. It results in disorder and vile practices, it said. This might be the stereotype of Wall Street wisdom. Wisdom from above is peacemaking. It's gentle, it's reasonable, it's merciful, and it's impartial. I just had the thought that when we were looking at the Roman Catholic 6 values there, how wisdom from above would link up with those. One of the questions I have is, if everyone lived with wisdom from above, would that take care of our AI concerns? Second thing is, if living in an AI world is a wisdom issue, and I think it is, then it's also a spiritual issue. And just so you know, the wisdom from above here is what the Bible calls wisdom that's found in Christ. Christians have a theological belief of being united to Christ, and he imparts us some of his wisdom. And that's what wisdom from above is. And that means wisdom is indeed a spiritual issue. And that means that wisdom and living in an AI world requires faith, it calls for prayer, and it calls for community. Wisdom is not in a special category of Christian living. Wisdom covers all of life. And finally, I'll reiterate the personal element, again, with a bit of a question. I'm far less interested in AI than I am in you. Now, you've already heard some qualifications to that statement, that we ought to be doggedly interested in AI. But I wonder if wisdom would say something like that and say, don't forget about the person in front of us. Don't forget about yourself. And don't forget about others. Let me finish with a quote by Vinod Ramachandra from The Robot Will See You Now. He says this: the most important human capacities in the age of robotics and surveillance will be our moral, social, and emotional intelligence. It won't be the STEM skills that are currently seen as important for getting a job and shrinking labor markets. The irony is that our technological future compels us to reflect less on our technologies and more about the future of our common humanity. Thanks very much.
Now, friends, it's time for our scheduled supper break. In fact, we're running a bit over time, and we do want to try to finish on time. So we're going to condense the supper break a little and allow 10 to 15 minutes. I'm in trouble because I said 10 to 15, it's really 10. There are 4 urns. There's self-serve coffee and tea. There is cake to help yourself to. If you're upstairs, please come down to the foyer area and serve yourself there. And we are going to come back and resume on a tight time schedule. If you miss out, you can just wait till the very end and maybe get some cake as you leave. The bookstall's out in the foyer. Also, I want to draw your attention to our Scots magazine. I'd love you to take one of those. Find out about Vespers, which is a new initiative coming up for us. So grab those things. Most importantly, if you want to ask a question for the panel discussion, you need to use the app slido.com and the code #panel to ask a question. Type that in during the supper break. Get going now and we'll call you back in 10, 12 or 15 minutes.
It's a great privilege for me to be here to moderate a conversation. Keep those questions coming in Slido. I'm excited to see lots of them popping up. Tonight, as you were listening to each other talk and as the conversation unfolded, I wondered, was there one particular thing that stood out to you in all the talks tonight? Something that startled you, something that surprised you, something that made you stop and think? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yes, it's interesting to hear a world expert on AI say, it's a black box, we don't really know what's going on.
Adrian, and I should actually introduce Adrian. I almost forgot to do that, I apologise. Adrian is our special panellist, and there's a reason he's our special panellist, and I'll get him to describe what he does as his day job.
Yes, so I work for an organisation called Faith Tech. You would have all received a pamphlet on your seat on your way in. Faith Tech started 8 years ago in Canada, and really is a ministry seeking to bridge the gap between the Christian faith and technology. So over the years, God's really blessed this ministry. We've got 37 different city-based communities all around the world of people who are wanting to have conversations just like the one we're having tonight. I've just recently started on team with them, and we're hoping to set up things here in Australia, so it's exciting. I think, Chris, what you were talking about, transhumanism, I've heard the term used quite a bit, but I think as you were unpacking it and helping us to understand what it was and then overlaying the Christian story with it, I just thought, wow, actually humans are so deeply, we're all looking for the same thing. Eternity, immortality, a sense of permanence, but we actually have the answers to that in our story, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Over to my right-hand side. Arthur, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go. I'm with Chris on this one, that we don't, when Neil said we don't really understand why the neural networks make certain connections and don't make other ones, was pretty surprising, to me. So this basically, the limit, sometimes you get the impression that we're so far down the line or things are so advanced, and relatively they are compared to other times. In some ways there's a lot that hasn't been figured out.
So for me, the thing that's surprising is looking at these two sides of the coin, the AI and the transhumanism, where we're, the AI stuff, which I talked about, is making computers that are more like, that are able to do things humans can't do. And then transhumanism is trying to make better humans. And the thing that ties these two together is the humans. And that is something that the church does know about. We have quite a good understanding of the fact that human beings have problems, as Arthur says, and then ways that you ameliorate that and work together in community.
Fine line between those two things, replacing and forming. How can we tell what is a wise way of discerning? How do we respond to that?
So I think, let's give an example of that.
Sure.
So I run the graduate research department at my university, so I look after all the people doing theses, PhD theses and master's theses. And we have AI tools that can help them. So you have AI, you can ask ChatGPT to say, I'm writing a chapter, what's a good outline? It can give you some prompts to allow you to structure your chapter better. So we have AI tools that do spell, even though you didn't know it, your spell checker is now an AI tool and your grammar checker is an AI tool. And we're quite happy for people to use those to enhance their writing. If you can produce better writing by having it check your grammar, that's great. But the other extreme, are we happy to have the AI just write the thing for us and have you submit it as your own work? That's not the right thing to do. And Arthur has talked about the fact that what do you then do when a student has clearly cheated? So we're happy for AI to check our grammar. We are not happy for the AI to write the thing for us. And there's a very weird space in between where, and I think where you're looking at this, at what point is the AI up to some point is enhancing our own creativity? So like with the artist examples I gave, use an AI to very quickly generate a whole bunch of examples of sorts of things they could try, and then pick the 1 or 2 or 3 they like and then work with those. But if the AI does it all for you, then it's not your creativity. So it's up to a point it's enhancing your creativity, and beyond that point it's doing it for you. So how, as teachers, how do we develop other human beings to be better human beings, to be more creative?
That's helpful. But it also leads to my next question, which is, what does it mean to be a good and not so good human being? And that traditionally, I think, in Christian thinking, there's been that tension of we are sinful people, so we are creatures, we're limited by being made and not the creator, and therefore we need to know our boundaries, as Arthur, you mentioned in your talk. But we also are about human thriving, to be the best human beings, the best images of God we can, both as Christians, but also for the rest of the world. We want non-believers also to thrive as humanity, as a common community of people.
I have a slightly tangential comment. I mean, in my talk, I talked about, I think Christians have strong answers to lots of those questions, where our society increasingly doesn't have answers, so we'll make some up. And for one person, you know, this is what they think it means to be human. For another, this is what they think. I think we need to remember Aristotle, who wasn't a Christian, I don't think. We need to remember Aristotle's idea that, you know, he talked about a knife. If you want to know what a good knife is, you can't know what a good knife is unless you know the purpose of a knife. You can't know, and therefore, by parallel, you can't know what a good human is or what humans ought to do unless you know the purpose of a human being. And our culture doesn't have much to say if it drops a religious worldview. It doesn't have much to say about the purpose of a human being, except what you can get out of evolution, and that would not be pretty. So, you know, you don't want to go looking for the purpose of life in evolution, because that's in tooth and claw. So Christianity, religion in general, but specifically Christianity, has a lot to say that answers the question about purposes, and therefore the ends to which we ought to be heading.
Great. Any other comments from the rest of the panel?
What I think is that artificial intelligence and transhumanism, and the fact that these technologies are now developed, throws these questions into sharp relief. So if I look out at the audience, there are some of you who will be very much defined by the things you do, so by the job you've got or by the fact that you're a parent, and that is part of what makes you a human. And one of the things as a parent myself is, when my daughter left home, oh, that's the difference to me. I define myself quite a lot by looking after her, and suddenly, oh, the reason that we are so unsettled by artificial intelligence is that it is throwing into sharp relief that it is attacking what makes us us. And one of the great things, we've got two reverends here, they can answer this better than me, but one of the great things about the church is that your grounding in who you are is not dependent on your job or on your relationship to other human beings. It's dependent on something deeper. I think that's why we are so unsettled. That suddenly there are these machines that sort of, and I've said this is not true, but sort of, they're starting to behave like they're human, and that's really disturbing. So some of what I said was to say, well, actually, we're not there yet. They are still just machines, and they are not thinking, even though they look like they are, they're behaving in interesting ways. But there are those questions of what happens if a machine could think, and what does that mean to us to be human?
Oversimplification. Like the Sunday school answer to how do you know what it means to be human is Jesus, right? Like Jesus came to reveal to us the nature of God, but he also came to reveal to us the nature of what it means to be human. And I think the interesting thing about when you think about transhumanism and you look at the life of Jesus, so much of transhumanism, as you were teaching us, Chris, was about alleviating suffering, prolonging life. But what is Jesus? Jesus is the opposite. He surrendered his position of privilege to live a life of profound underprivilege and suffering. And then same with so much of Pauline theology is about how does God sanctify us, make us more like Christ through suffering. And so there's a point at which there is also a paradoxical relation between the Christian vision of flourishing in humanity and the transhumanist or even the artificial, and same with when it comes to, for example, reasoning, right? Artificial intelligence consumes a lot of information, does a risk analysis, but how does that factor into things like taking risks or taking faith steps, which are illogical at times, you know? So I think it's helpful to understand where there's an alignment and where there's actually a contrary view and how those interrelate as well. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Adrian. I've got a bunch of questions here, sort of circling around what would artificial intelligence in Christianity look like? So you could have a prayer partner or some sort of AI entity in understanding Christian faith or training, or you could pray with something that can be trained to comprehend faith. What are your thoughts on that? Again, it's sort of impinging on the kind of what is human, what is not. But if AI, for instance, I think you said in your talk, Neil, can be trained to affect a certain degree of empathy.
Let's start with the easy questions, eh? So what does AI, what would you look at if AI in Christianity, so the idea of an AI prayer partner just doesn't work for me, because when you're praying in Christianity, you are not praying to an abstract entity, you're praying to a person. That is a relational thing. If the AI is simply a weak AI that is just responding to stimuli, then it's not a relationship. And we actually have stories all the way back to Eliza in the 1960s. Do you remember Eliza? Sorry, yes. Oh, hello. So we remember in the 1960s, a guy developed a tool called Eliza, which responded to prompts. It used a particular type of psychological counseling where it just responded back by asking you a question back. So if you said, oh, I've always had problems with my mother, it would come back with, tell me more about your family. And just...
So maybe prayer is a bad example. What about if AI gave a better sermon than Arthur or Chris or me?
So yes, I've used AI to do the little summaries of...
Really?
Yes.
Really? Wow, okay.
I said to ChatGPT,
that won't pass muster at Monash Uni.
explain the difference between the crucifixion stories and the four Gospels. And so what it's doing is, of course, drawing on its database of training data, which has a whole bunch of theological books in it. And so it pulls out something that sounds plausible, but if you dig into it with theological knowledge, you'll probably find it got it quite wrong. So at the moment, I'll be very wary of using these tools to do almost anything. Like my friend Bronwyn got her students to write essays, and a fifth of the class used ChatGPT to write the essays, and she said they were beautifully written essays of
absolute
total
nonsense.
nonsense.
Yeah. I get a lot of those too.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's an element of a human discernment and wisdom and understanding that comes into it.
Yeah. But what if we could get an artificial general intelligence, something that was actually intelligent and could think and had a personality and was self-aware? And then you get into all sorts of questions like, well, if this thing is self-aware, does it need a savior? Which is sort of getting into a very nice, fun speculation where we can sit around over coffee and talk about these things and have no idea of what the answer is. Sorry.
I think people up the back are having trouble hearing us, Neil.
Sorry.
Just sing out. There's a question, and I've lost it, so I'm going to try to summarise it. It's very hard to try to do all this. Because AI is about the collation of data. So the more data you enter into it, the sort of better ability it has to something that's comparable to a human being doing it. What if we gave them the data of all the wisdom of this room and said, come up with something? Would that make things better morally? ethically? If the data set was wise, discerning Christians, thoughtful people come out on a Saturday night to hear this.
So you'd get there's certainly not enough people in this room to feed it with enough data to make it work. So you need an enormous amount of data to make this work. But if you get all that, ChatGPT is just a tool that strings words together. That's all it's doing. It's stringing words together in ways that are plausible. And so you get beautifully written stuff that could be erudite and could be nonsense. And the reason we think it's great is because we are putting meaning into it. So ChatGPT can write really good poetry, but it's only good poetry because you are interpreting it to mean things that it is. For ChatGPT, it's just words strung together. For you, you can see the meaning in it because you know what a cherry blossom looks like. You know what a dawn looks like. You know what love is like. It's just stringing words together. So we could take the collected wisdom, we could feed it lots and lots of good stuff, but still, it's just stringing words together. It doesn't have the understanding that you have.
Gosh, I've just been told I've got 1 minute, so this is really very stressful because I'm trying to decide if there's like a central question that will tie everything together magically. Somebody put it in there into the Slido. Okay, so I'll end on a practical one. Thank you so much, Neil, for giving us that one. Any advice for Christians involved in engineering and the training of AI? Yes, we can definitely go around
The wisdom part.
thoughts.
Yeah,
Yes.
I guess I would just say, just to kind of take seriously those elements of Christian practice that Christians do otherwise and should be doing. Prayer, faith, and living in community, and so on, and things like that. It's not particular, but it's very practical. I just push those three things.
So, yes, so the technology is not intrinsically evil or intrinsically good. It can be used for both, as I've said. So if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, they were making wonderful machines for making cotton, and they were taking people out of the fields, factories in the most appalling conditions, working 14, 16-hour days with very little pay and housing them badly. Christian entrepreneurs like Elias Salt and the Bournevilles, they wanted to make money, they wanted to use these machines. They created factories where people had decent places to live and had decent ways of working. So they brought the humanity back into something that had actually dehumanized a lot of. And that's where Christians can do this, is by taking the perspective that we believe that human beings are intrinsically valuable in and of themselves, not by how much money they have, not by what they can bring to us, but they're intrinsically valuable by that, and by having that lens on top of things, you suddenly say, we can do things here for good.
Adrian.
I'm glad you asked this question to Wayne. This is a call to action. So I want to share a quote I found from Andy Crouch. So this is to all the developers, engineers, builders, entrepreneurs. He says, why aren't we Christians known as creators? People who dare to think and do something that has never been thought or done before, something that makes the welcoming and thrilling and beautiful. And I think it's great to be mindful of the dangers, the threats, what if those things happen, but there's something unique, like I want us to impart courage. We are created by the Creator to create with Him. And that's what we've been commissioned into this world to do. So, yeah.
Thank you. Last words, Chris?
Amen.
Very wise.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to each of the... Speaking of amens, Adrian and I were talking during our coffee break and realised that one thing that we really would like to do together, and I think need to do together, is to pray. So I thought, if you wouldn't mind, Adrian, that you might lead us in a short prayer. Keep in mind, it has to be short because I think I've gone way over time, and then I'll hand over to Phil to close up for us. Let's pray together.
Thank you so much for tonight. We thank you for the community that you've assembled here of people who are interested, who are curious, who are concerned, who are hopeful. And we pray that tonight, as we have pondered the possibilities, pondered the dangers and the threats, God, that you would remind us that we are your hands and feet, we are the salt and the light. That no matter what the future holds, which we don't know, but you do, We pray that you would give us courage and hope for the days that lie ahead. Fill us afresh with your, that wherever we may be called or sent, that we may bring your truth and your light and your word into this world. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Now, folks, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's been a great night. Thank you to everyone on the panel, to our speakers. If I could summarise very quickly, don't forget, the problem really is us, humanity all the time. Whether or not a sub, that's the answer. And as Adrian said, don't really expect ChatGPT or AI to keep reminding you that the solution is Jesus. That's where we need to keep our eyes. Don't forget, take a quick look again at the ISCAST stall on your way out, the Faith Tech resources, Scots Church magazine, information about our new Vespers service coming up. Also, Neil is preaching for us here in this building tomorrow night, 5 p.m. All welcome to come and join us. Again, thank you so much for being with us, and good night.